All right, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for making it. This is STL Pareto Success Program based right here in Greater St. Louis. And of course, if you're looking at this on the podcast, then you can actually see that the arch is the gateway to the west, reminding us of our humble beginnings back to the days of Lewis and Clark. And it also reminds us of the spirit of exploration. And the spirit of exploration is cornerstone of STL Pareto. And even more cornerstone than that is something called Pareto Principle, Pareto Efficiency, or Pareto Optimality, or Pareto's Law. It's usually called the 80-20 Principle. So if you've heard of the 80-20 Principle, that is the cornerstone of this podcast. And if you're in St. Louis, then you actually qualify for a free consultation. I do some one-on-one coaching. Otherwise, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. The topic for today is turning your mess into your message. So this is going to be a deep one. It's going to involve a couple different books that I reference, just because I always reference books, because the books largely make up what's going on in my brain. The only reason that you like this podcast is because, number one, I have a really soothing radio voice, and number two, I know what the heck I'm talking about, and you can tell that the reason I know what I'm talking about is because I've read so many of these books. So when I reference them, I'm just pointing you to a new direction on the book list page, where if you're curious, you can check them out yourself. Anyway, how to turn your mess into a message. Why is this important in the first place? And does it have to do with PP? So there's the power of perspective. Being a psychology expert as I am, I've got a couple different mental lattice works or frameworks or ways of looking at people and the way their behaviors may be categorized in specific criteria. So that being said, one of those is the power of perspective. And the power of perspective is that each of us have a psychological lens. Each of us see the world through a specific way that is our way to see the world, or your way to see the world. And just because you see the world your way, or your friend sees the world his way or her way, it doesn't change the fact that you see the world your way. And in the Four Agreements, he explains that this is your own personal book of law. He calls it your own personal book of law. I call it the power of perspective, but they're pretty much the same thing. And what makes you do something probably unique from what makes somebody else do something. And it's probably similar in some ways too. So the power of perspective ties into this because, number one, what is a mess? And number two, what is a message? A mess would be something that on the outside looks like it's going wrong. Like on the outside, it has that apparentness that it might be not going the best way it possibly can. And that's just the outside exterior. And you may label it with some superficial labeling mechanism, and you may label it and call it a mess, or, silly, or dumb, or useless, or stupid, or pointless, or a mess, or problem, or pain. Oftentimes, if you think of you have pain somewhere, it's probably because of a mess. And mess has to do with the interflex of emotions and thoughts. Because there are not just thoughts and there are not just emotions. There's not a wall between them. They're the same thing. What I'm trying to say, they're the same thing. So if you can understand your emotions, then you'll also understand your thoughts. And ultimately, you want to understand both and make sure they're both flowing from the same source. So let's get back to this mess or message. A mess would be something that you think is a problem in your life or something that's not quite going right. Could be a relationship, could be a working relationship, even personal relationships, or working relationships with coworkers that maybe don't get along so well, or who knows what it could be. It could be a problem with physical things like a tool or a automobile or something like that, or maybe inward also, some sort of heart level or brain level. The way you're thinking is sort of a problem, which is the most difficult to analyze, by the way, because the easiest person to fool is yourself. That's the one person you absolutely cannot fool if you want to absolutely succeed in the success program. You need to turn your mess into a message. And that's what I'm doing in my life right now. It's what I encourage you to do as well. Because life is ongoing, it's a continuous journey. It doesn't end, and frankly, it doesn't begin either. Later on, I'll be doing some videos about some other interesting topics that I like to talk about. Liquid democracy may be one of those topics. Non-locality may be one of those topics. The reason I bring up non-locality is because of two books, interesting books. One's called The Power of When, and the other is called The Long Clock of Now. When it comes to non-locality, the one I reference most of the time first is The Non-Local Universe by Stephen Reichmer. And in each of these three books is explain the fact that time is not going anywhere. So you're going to see later on why I call this flowing momentum. But to make a long story short, time's not going anywhere. All events that you think took place in the past, or all events that you believe will take place in the future, are actually taking place in the present, in the now moment. All time is now. There's no time that's not now. If you think, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow afternoon does not exist anywhere except in your own brain, in your own non-local triune. Now, in order to turn your mess into a message, you've got to apply the power of perspective. Power of perspective. So basically, this is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. There's something called sympathy, and there's something called empathy. And empathy is basically willing to walk 1,000 miles in the other person's shoes. That when you look at the person and you're talking to the person, you're not just talking to their face, but you've gathered from their face in the method of emotional intelligence, body language, nonverbal communication. Blink by Malcolm Gladwell is another one. And instead of looking at their face, you look deep down into them and you see what makes their expression unique, and then you place yourself there. You literally remove your consciousness from your own brain, from your own non-local triune, and you put it in theirs. Literally, you place yourself in their shoes and in their body and in their face and everywhere about them, and you imagine yourself as that person. And that is called empathy. And I encourage you to look up empathy. There's a lot into it. It's also part of the psychology of winning, which I'll reference several times. It's on the book list as well. stlpareto.com/list. So don't worry about going to that website right now. Just stay around, listen to a couple more videos first, because it's kind of hard to get started reading right away. It took me about 2 months, and I hated every day of it. I'm not gonna lie. There's another psychological principle we'll get to later on called the power of pleasure principle. power of pleasure principle. And that's what I applied to force myself to enjoy reading. It's what I highly encourage that you do to make sure that you enjoy reading a lot more, as well as your work, because your work should be your main source of joy. I dreamt and thought that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. I want you to have the same service mentality for your clients in your business that I do for my clients in my business. That service mentality is how you actually enjoy work. Not just thinking that you do, but actually do. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal. Part of that can be done by turning your mess into a message. So the power of pleasure principle is basically associating pleasure from something. Like if you want to for me, when I was reading, I would like drink coffee. I was trying to get all of my five senses. This is based on some copywriting research. Again, marketing psychology. I'm an expert. But basically, you want to get more of the senses drawn in. So I had like a coffee and some chocolate and like literally like Hershey's special dark chocolate, which is like not the best, but it's still pretty good. That's builds a pleasure because there's something called Pavlovian association. And you may have heard this if you ever took a psychology class anywhere at any time. Pavlov was a psychologist who had some dogs, and he rang a bell and gave the dogs food, and they were salivate because they smelled the food and they were about to eat the food. And salivation is actually the beginning of the digestion process to get all those enzymes worked up. Because the saliva is actually alive, there's bacteria and living organisms in it. The Pavlov association basically, he did this for days and days and weeks, and eventually he rang the bell and did not bring any food. He rang the bell and did not bring any food, and the dogs still continued to salivate. The dogs still continued to salivate because of something that later became known as the Pavlovian association. And this association principle is a psychology principle that works in you as well, because there's three layers of the brain. There's the brain stem, the limbic brain, and the human mind way up top. The limbic brain, everything goes through the limbic brain when you're going from your human mind down to the rest of your body. It goes through that limbic brain. So building an association principle into your psychology repertoire, absolutely essential if you want to be a major success program. You can find that out on my website, How to Turn Your Mess into a Message. How to turn your mess into a message. Well, it's the power of perspective. So all you can do is put yourself in another person's shoes. There's another quote. I'm full of quotes. So you're going to hear a lot of them on this podcast. I had the blues for I had no shoes until upon the street I saw a man who had no feet. I had the blues, for I had no shoes, until upon the street I saw a man who had no feet. So that one right there pretty much ties up the whole power of perspective in one sentence or two sentences. The power of perspective is just that. It's placing yourself in someone else. Like if you see somebody with a service dog and you think, oh, maybe they're blind or in a wheelchair, just imagine what's it like to be that person right now. There's another story about a woman who takes her daughter or son to the shopping mall as it's, a holiday season, Christmas time and whatever. And so she's taking her child to the mall to go shopping because we're going to see Santa, we're going to go shopping, do the shopping. And so the parent, the mother, is living in this one perspective where shopping is something enjoyable. And you can see the lights and the decorations and all the mannequins that kind of freak you out with the trains and all that stuff, right? But then the child is crying. The child's very unhappy. Very unhappy. This child's very unhappy, and the child is crying. Gets the mother's attention. The mother, after several times of basically ignoring the child and telling it to just stop, gets down on her knee and says, "Hey, are you?" As she gets down to the child's level, she sees things from a new perspective. And as now she is seeing things from a new perspective, she sees nothing but purses and bags and, a bunch of dirty floor from wet, snowy, shoes, and all over the place is just people and pants and dresses and skirts and coats and bags and bags and bags, and that there's no decorations, there's no lights, there's nothing nice to see, there's nothing pleasurable to eyesight when it gets down to that level. When you're just 2.5 feet tall in the world, it's a lot different world as what she got to saw from that change of perspective. And so that's called the power of perspective as well. And turning my mess into a message. I'm talking about the reason I'm here in St. Louis is my message right now. It's my mess, and I'm turning that into my message. So I've got to think about the heart of St. Louis and what really, really, really gets me excited about St. Louis all by myself. When I think of why do I like St. Louis so much? What is the reason? I like Mark Twain. I know that he grew up around here. The author of Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn. I'm pretty sure he grew up like maybe an hour away or 2 or 3 hours away, a little north. The zoo is one of the best in the country, I believe. The St. Louis Zoo is one of the best in the country, I believe. It's like one of the top 5, maybe top 3. It's something that you get accustomed to. Like if you're from St. Louis like I am, you kind of get used to it. You don't think about it much, but it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Just like me, I'm from Collinsville. If you've ever been to Collinsville, you'll never forget it. I always ask people, have you driven through? And they'll say, oh, not the whole place, not the whole part of it, because they can tell I'm about to ask them, have you seen in Collinsville, Illinois? Founded after the Collins family, it was a town of miners, coal miners. The largest ketchup bottle in the world. That's what Collinsville is well known for. Collinsville is the world's largest ketchup bottle. And back in the day, there was a ketchup manufacturing plant which needed its own water source. So this was a water tower for that building. It has since been decommissioned. It's not held water in a number of years, but it's still a symbol of Collinsville. And every Christmas, the city of Collinsville puts some sort of decorations up there. Usually, it looks like Santa is trying to unscrew the cap of the ketchup bottle, and maybe he wants to go swimming in the ketchup. Maybe. I don't know why they keep putting Santa Claus on the ketchup bottle, but that's our ketchup bottle. And Collinsville is very proud of it because every year there's a ketchup bottle festival, and there's also a hot rod festival. So there's a lot of classic cars, which you'll absolutely love. You can do a Google search for it if you want to check out Collinsville one of these days. It's a great little town. We're also known for a horseradish. Collinsville, Illinois is also the horseradish festival of the world. So being world class is not something that I am new at. It's something I've got experience at. And in large part, it's because I know how to turn my mess into a message. We'll talk about this in the next video, why it has to do with values and beliefs, and how values and beliefs are one and the same. But ultimately, the answer to your questions would be to have stronger self-love, to make sure that you love yourself. There's another quote that you can look up if you want to. It's called, or how it goes, if you don't love yourself, who will? If you don't love yourself, who will? So make sure that you love yourself a whole lot. Make sure that you love yourself, you care about yourself first, and then face everything else after that. But make sure you got that as a cornerstone, and as long as that's where you started at, you'll be good. So if you like this podcast, go ahead and subscribe, give me a thumbs up. If you're interested in being better tomorrow than you are today, you're in the right spot. Stay on this podcast. I got new videos coming out every week. And lastly, I do have an ebook. I'm also an author and I write. So I've got an ebook out. It's called Best in the World, Why I Am, How You Can Be Too. I normally charge $15, but for you listeners today, I want to give it to you for free. You can head over to my website, stlpareto.com. And then right there will be like the free ebook thing. Basically, you're going to get a promotion code. And I look forward to seeing you over there. Stay tuned for next week's episode.